moving our journey on for our final part as part of our presentation of our forum week now, we're really thinking about self-neglect within adults to finalise our kind of neglect across the lifespan here. And I'm really pleased to introduce to you Michael Preston-Shoot, who is from the Somerset Safeguarding Adults Board as the independent chair, who's a real expert in this area. So Michael, if it's okay with you, I'll hand over to you.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Steve, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for making space in what is no doubt a crowded diary to attend this webinar. I have many more slides than I am going to have time to talk to in detail. But I have done that deliberately in the hope that what I have put together is a resource pack for you, and the slides and a handout version of the slides will be made available to you all, and I have no objection at all if you wish to use the material in the work that you do and the conversations that you have. For those of you who don't know me, my professional background is social work, and I spent a considerable number of years as a social work academic. And what I would invite you to do as I talk through the slides, and indeed subsequently when you reflect on the material that's in there, I would invite you to conduct your own appreciative inquiry and your own temperature check about the issues that I raise, and particularly what enables best practice and the obstacles or barriers that get in the way of best practice. Because that lived experience, your lived experience, is absolutely crucial when it comes to the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership and the Somerset Safeguarding Adult Board, knowing how to support you in the work that you do. The sources of evidence for what I'm going to say come predominantly from Safeguarding Adult Reviews, and I've given you a website address where you can find a library of Safeguarding Adult Reviews. I will also make mention of some serious case reviews, as we used to call them, on the children's side, that reflect on transitional safeguarding, that reflect on self-neglect, in the context of thinking family, and that shed light on concerned curiosity and how challenging that can sometimes be. So this is an evidence-based presentation. It will result in slides that actually give you an evidence base for transitional safeguarding and an evidence base for self-neglect, and that's why I'm encouraging you to undertake your own appreciative inquiry and your own temperature check about your lived experience of work in Somerset. And in relation to concerned curiosity, what we find, particularly from Safeguarding Adult Reviews, is that it's recognised as an important skill, but it's challenging. And I'm sure you've all got experience of where you were aware of the importance of following a particular line of questioning, a particular line of what we might call concerned curiosity or professional curiosity, but recognising that actually you were in a working context where that was particularly difficult or particularly challenging. And I've put at the bottom of this slide 3 pieces of advice that have emerged from Safeguarding Adult Reviews, have emerged from my conversations with individuals who were negotiating life challenges, and indeed from the opinion of coroners who have looked at cases. So the reference to carefrontational questions is an encouragement for you to demonstrate concerned curiosity, to ask questions based in authoritative doubt, or if you like, professional skepticism about what you're being told, but to try to do that from a position of carefulness, where you think about the word careful, not in the one word, but in the hyphenated sense. because what I know from people with lived experience of safeguarding, both children's safeguarding and adult safeguarding, is that they appreciate practitioners who are challenging them, who are asking them to think about particular issues, but where they recognize that the practitioner is doing that from a position of care, from a position of carefulness in the hyphenated sense of that word. And then looking for the not so obvious is something I remember from my own social work training back in the mid 1970s, where one of the lecturers that we had at that time, when asked what is the most important skill that a social worker might have, said, look for the not so obvious. And I've never forgotten that piece of advice, and I pass it on here. But alongside that, a coroner advising us not to neglect the obvious when we are in particular settings, when we're engaged with people, when we're looking out for not just what people say, but also what they're not saying, or how they are engaging with us non-verbally. So some pieces of advice about concerned curiosity, but recognizing that expressing concerned curiosity, following lines of questioning, even with as much carefulness as we can all muster, that can be quite challenging. And part of the temperature check that I would encourage you to reflect on, part of the appreciative inquiry that I would encourage you to reflect on, is when it is experienced, when you do experience difficulty in expressing concerned curiosity or professional curiosity, why might that be? And can we have candid conversations with each other about those occasions when we've known that we should be asking something, we've known that we should be exploring something, but it's felt too difficult. And I can remember as a social worker practitioner myself, as a family therapist and a psychotherapist in the mists of time, there were occasions when I knew that I should be following something up, but it just felt too difficult, and I thought I'll do it on another occasion. And the problem with that is that those other occasions don't always happen. So some reflections on this slide for you to consider after this lunchtime webinar on why sometimes we might put concerned curiosity in the too difficult box, hoping to return to it on another occasion. Is this part of your lived experience of work? If it is, then are your supervisors, your peers, your line managers aware of the complexities and the challenges that you experience in your day-to-day work? And indeed, is the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership aware of how sometimes it can be felt too difficult to follow particular lines of questioning? And having focused briefly on the importance of concerned curiosity when working with children, young people, young adults, older adults, I'm now moving to thinking about the importance of thinking family. Because whether you are working with an adult who self-neglects, whether you are working with a young person, a young adult negotiating transition from children's services to adult services, from children's mental health to adult mental health, and so on. These individuals will have relationships. Some of those relationships will be helpful, will be a circle of support. Some of those relationships will be abusive, neglectful, and dysfunctional. And we have to understand the individual in their context, and that is as true for adult social care social workers and social care workers as it is true for those of you who are working in children's social care and children's social work. We have to understand the individual in their context. And if I draw from Safeguarding Adult Reviews on this and some of the subsequent slides, you will see that sometimes reviews have found evidence of good practice, of excellent practice in terms of thinking family, how children's social workers and adult social care social workers have recognized the importance of appreciating the individual in their context and addressing the challenges that individuals were experiencing because of the context in which they were having to live their lives. So some direct quotes about good practice, but equally Safeguarding Adult Reviews have found shortcomings in terms of how services think family, and shortcomings in particular about how children's social care and adult social care work together, about how children's mental health and adult mental health work together, about how substance misuse providers for young people and substance misuse providers for younger and older adults work together. So wherever you are in the architecture of safeguarding in Somerset, I would encourage you to think family in the context of who else needs to be aware of the work that I am doing with a particular individual in their familial and their social context. Who needs to be aware of that? Who do I need to consult with? Who do I need to involve? Who might hold information that actually might be useful for me in the work that I am doing? And so the quotes here are about shortcomings in that respect from Safeguarding Adult Reviews and further quotations drawn from a national analysis of Safeguarding Adult Reviews that is published on the Local Government Association website. And some further quotes emphasizing again the importance of thinking family, but thinking family in the context of thinking about a wraparound approach, thinking about a whole system approach to working with families. So again, in terms of your appreciative inquiry, your temperature check, how assured are you that there is that whole system approach that recognizes that individuals are living in a context and we need to respond within that context? And to flesh that out a little more, I would strongly encourage you to read Safeguarding Adult Reviews, where curiosity and where thinking family has been highlighted. And indeed, obviously, I would encourage you also to read Safeguarding Children Practice Reviews and before the change in systems brought in by the Children and Social Work Act 2017, to read serious case reviews in relation to children and young people. So here are some human stories. These are from Safeguarding Adult Reviews. They are all in the public domain. This particular story is about the importance of recognizing that families who have provided significant and substantial amounts of care, in this case for a learning disabled young adult also on the autistic spectrum, that they had a considerable amount of knowledge about how to meet Christopher's care and support needs, how to meet his social needs, his emotional needs. And yet when he was placed in independent living, the contribution of the family as a circle of support was massively undervalued by the staff that were running the independent living accommodation in which Christopher had been placed. So it is a SAR which in a sense makes a plea that where family members are an important circle of support, that we value the expertise that they have, the knowledge that they have, and the contributions that they can make. And that is further emphasised in this particular safeguarding adult review, known as Andy. Andy had 3 very serious life-limiting illnesses, one of which required him to have renal dialysis 3 times a week, one of which required medication in order to prevent his throat swelling up, because if that did, he would not be able to breathe or swallow, and he would die. He was living in really quite extreme poverty. These life-limiting illnesses had arisen when Andy was a young person, an adolescent, and yet nobody in the adult system appeared to have reflected, appeared to have been curious about the impact of these life-limiting healthcare conditions on Andy's wishes, feelings, hopes, ambitions. And equally, no one thought family. He had a sister, he had a brother, he had a stepfather, and he had a close friend. And yet none of the services involved thought it important enough to explore with Andy's family and friend in his social network whether they could be a circle of support, and indeed whether they could shed information that might help services to understand and more effectively engage with Andy. And here I would make a link with what Danielle mentioned. She used on one of her slides the phraseology lifestyle choice. People made assumptions in Andy's case that he was making a lifestyle choice not to engage. No one was curious about, well, was it more likely that Andy was not brought to appointments, or was it more likely that Andy was unable to engage in appointments with healthcare clinicians, with social workers, and with others, because in fact he was too ill, he was too disabled to keep to appointments without a circle of support around him. And when we reflect on the labels that we use, if we're using the label, this individual is not engaging, this individual is resistant, we need to reflect on actually whether it's us and our services that are not engaging, rather than the individual or the family themselves. This is a story of domestic abuse between a mother and her adult son, and the importance of recognizing coercive and controlling behavior, but also the importance of recognizing that familial relationships develop over time. They are not necessarily consistent from day one through to the end. So we need to be curious about the way in which relationships within a family develop over time. So that too is a central message from this particular Safeguarding Adult review. And here, a slightly different message. This is a school having done what we would all encourage a school to do, which was to refer into children's safeguarding concerns about the presentation at school of a number of children from a particular family, concerned about emotional neglect and physical neglect. And children's social workers did what we would hope that children's social workers do. They visited the family to pick up the referral from the school and to begin to explore what might be happening within this family. And they recognized that Mr. K in this situation was self-neglecting. He appeared to have mental health difficulties. There also appeared to be relationship strain between Mr. K and the children's mother. And children's social workers made an appropriate referral to adult social care. But what they did not do was to follow up that referral and to check how adult social care had picked up that referral, which included safeguarding components, adult safeguarding components. And in fact, adult social care had not picked up that referral, had not recognised the self-neglect, the adult safeguarding components, self-neglect, domestic abuse, and so forth. And so children's social workers focused on the children. They did not focus on the whole family, and they did not follow through on the appropriate referral that they had made to adult social care. So Mr. K, his partner, and to a sense, and in a sense, the wider family, fell through the gap between children's social care on the one hand and adult social care on the other. And I use that as an illustration to invite you again to conduct your appreciative inquiry and your temperature check. Is there a gap between children's social care and adult social care in your lived experience of work in Somerset? If there is, then I, as the independent chair of the Safeguarding Adults Board in Somerset, need to know that. And need to work with senior leaders across the social care architecture in Somerset to ensure that that gap does no longer exist. And then on the children's side, some reference to serious case reviews, which I found some time ago when I looked at the NSPCC library in terms of safeguarding adult reviews, reminding us again about the importance of thinking family and reminding us that children and young people, parents, whether older parents or younger parents, are living in a familial and a social context, and we need to pay close attention to that if children, young people, and indeed adults are to be safe. So some examples where shortcomings were found in respect of thinking family from a children and young person's perspective. And we also need to recognise, both in children's social work and in adult social work, that there will be occasions when family members prevent us from having access to a child or a young person, a young adult or an older adult that we believe to be at risk of abuse or neglect. And on the children's side, in the 1989 Children Act, child assessment orders, for example, one avenue in order to seek judicial authority to ensure that you can see and assess a child or a young person that you might believe is at risk of abuse or neglect. On the adult side, the Care Act 2014 is less helpful when it comes to legal authority to see an adult that you believe to be at risk. There are options within the Police and Criminal Evidence Act and the Mental Health Act, and ultimately inherent jurisdiction in the High Court that might be useful in particular situations in order to gain access to an adult that you regard as at risk. And I've given some examples of where that issue arose. What it illustrates in relation to thinking family is the importance of seeking legal advice and advice from safeguarding specialists as soon as you believe that there is a risk that you are being frustrated in terms of attempting to assess or mitigate. And some of you may be working in the area of transitional safeguarding in relation to care experienced young people and care experienced young adults. And I've already, in my short tenure as the independent chair in Somerset, because I only came into post in the middle of January, had some very helpful conversations about transitional safeguarding in Somerset. But I've referenced 3 safeguarding adult reviews at the top of this slide, which highlight the importance of transitional safeguarding. And whether you are social workers and social care workers on the children's side or on the adult side, it is important that you are legally literate, that you are aware of what the legal rules require in children's legislation and in the Care Act 2014 in terms of transitional safeguarding, and that you are aware of the evidence base about what best practice looks like in relation to transitional safeguarding. And what I've done in this slide and forthcoming slides in relation to transitional safeguarding is to summarize the evidence base for you in relation to transitional safeguarding. And again, I would make a link with the presentation that you heard earlier. And the link is around brain development. Brain development does not stop at the magical age of 18, which is why we need a developmental approach, not an age-bound approach to transitional safeguarding. What I would also emphasize in relation to brain development is that we know that adverse experiences, adverse childhood experiences, traumatic experiences can have a profound effect on the frontal lobe of the brain, as indeed Danielle highlighted in her presentation. It can have a devastating, quite devastating effect on the frontal lobe of the brain. And the frontal lobe of the brain controls our capacity to act. It controls our executive functioning. So you may be called upon with 16 and 17-year-olds and with young adults to assess their mental capacity. Do not simply rely on what an individual says, because what we say is not controlled by the frontal lobe of the brain, but what we do or do not do is controlled by the frontal lobe of the brain. So we need to explore executive functioning, particularly where we have evidence to believe that adverse experiences have played a significant part in a person's life journey. Think family, a whole person approach. Personalized, we need to make safeguarding personal, whether that is safeguarding of children and young people or safeguarding of adults. And we need to think family. We need to understand the backstory, the history or the herstory in relation to an individual's journey through life. Further elements of the evidence base, the importance of robust and thorough assessments, which amongst other things are legally literate, that they comply with the statutory requirements on children's services and on adult services. And that we work together, that we have a whole system response in relation to transitional safeguarding, and that we share information, and where necessary, we share information without consent in order to safeguard a child or an adult at risk. And we share information across boundaries, geographical, political, local authority boundaries, where that is necessary in order to enable and authorities into whose area an individual is moving to appreciate, to understand the work that has been done in Somerset. Again, some different elements or reinforcing the elements of the evidence base, particularly around information sharing and about family involvement to explore whether they can be a circle of support. And I would also emphasize the importance of you reflecting on who looks after you, who safeguards you, who supports you, because you can only be the best practitioners and operational managers that you can be if you yourselves feel supported by your peers, by your line managers, and by your senior managers. So at the top of this slide is my aspiration that you will reflect on how well supported you feel to undertake work which is often complex, often challenging, with huge amounts of uncertainty. You need to be supported. How well are you supported? And in terms of information sharing between services within a local authority area and across boundaries in the way that I described, 2 reviews that very recently highlighted the importance of that. And a further review which highlights similarly the importance of thinking family and sharing information across services. And then lastly, because as I promised, this was going to be a sprint when it could be a marathon, and I can see Steve has turned his camera on, which is a kind of warning for me that we're almost out of time. Some slides which I'm not going to talk about, but which present the evidence base, not just about transitional safeguarding, not just about self-neglect, but actually the evidence base about all types of abuse or neglect, drawn from safeguarding adult reviews, but with profound relevance for those of you who are working on the children's side of the architecture. So the evidence base about direct practice, the evidence base about the team around the person, the evidence base that highlights the importance of you being supported in the work that you are doing. And then ultimately the evidence base about what the safeguarding children partnerships and the safeguarding adult boards should be doing in this particular space. And then lastly, a final word from someone who had lived experience of safeguarding. An adult who was a disabled person who required adult social care to respond to her needs in order that she could live the quality of life that she wished to live as a disabled adult. But she was also a parent of a disabled son, and she needed children's social care to respond to her son's needs in order that she could be the best parent that she could be. And if you read this particular safeguarding adult review, you will see that we didn't measure up. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that we are working with and ask ourselves a candid question. What are we seeing when we put ourselves in the shoes of the people that we are working with? Thank you for listening. We don't have time for discussion, but I hope that you will take the messages away from today and perhaps in your teams and in your supervisory sessions, have a conversation about where are the enablers for best practice and where are the barriers and how do we begin to address the barriers. Finally, from me, thank you for the work that you are doing. It may not always feel like that you are making a difference, but trust me, you do make a difference. And for that, we should be profoundly grateful. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Michael. Really appreciate it. And just seeing in chat here, comment from Claire saying really interested all round care-led and whole person presentation. So thank you so much for that.